Hey guys, it's Charlene. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm doing something a little bit different. We are going to go over the 15 basics for the new paper crafter. So the first basic product you're going to want to have is some acrylic blocks and or a stamping platform of some type. There are different kinds on the market. I want to talk about each one here. The acrylic blocks, I find it really helpful if they have lines on them because that makes it easy to line up your stamps. And then when you're looking over as you're stamping down, it makes it much easier to make sure you're stamping straight onto your card. Now, they come in lots of different sizes. I recommend getting some type of pack with different sizes in it. I have lots of other acrylic blocks too, so I have like large ones and small ones. I recently purchased this set from scrapbook.com because I liked how thick they are and that they have these wavy sides to kind of grip onto as you're stamping. And I have used them several times. They're also great for weighing down things when you are gluing things onto your card or you're gluing together die cuts. You can set them underneath there and wait until they dry a little bit. So no matter what, I definitely recommend having some acrylic blocks in your stash. Now, the level up from that is a stamping platform. Stamping platforms are amazing. I used to have one from We Are Memory Keepers, and it was the type where the plate comes off and then you have the base and you put your card or your paper on there and you put the stamp on the little plate and then you put the plate on and push down and stamp. I loved it. It worked great. But then I purchased my first MISTI. You can see I have two here. I purchased my first MISTI and I thought I would go back to the other stamping platform sometimes. I haven't pulled it out a single time. Something about this hinged mechanism on the MISTI really increases the chances of being able to do a second stamping without any kind of blurring of your lines. Now, have I had blurring with a MISTI? Yes, but that's user error. It's usually because I don't get my card back into the corner of my MISTI perfectly before I re-stamp. Do you need more than one size? No. Is it nice to have more than one size? Yes. And these are pricey, so certainly, it's an investment, but it is a good investment. Like these will last a really long time. They work so well. And why would you want two different sizes? Well, I'll tell you. I started out with this one, and this one is great for stamping repeating patterns, or if you're wanting to stamp a ton of stamps at once, or if you want to stamp for a slimline card or a 5x7 card or something like that. Now the mini, it's easier to handle because it's a much smaller size. It can fit on your desk and not get on the way. It's easier to grab, and it fits any of your standard A2 sized cards, which are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I usually reach for the mini, and if I can't make the mini work, then I will grab the larger size. There's also a 12 by 12 size that I know a lot of scrapbookers use. So definitely stamping platform if you can afford one. The second product you're going to need is some type of die cutting machine. I use the Spellbinders Platinum 6. It is a compact machine, and the reason I say that is because you can fold these two sides up and it's easy to move around. Now, I almost never fold these sides up, so it just depends on how limited of a space you have, but it can be really nice if you have a small crafting space because you can fold those up when you're not using it. It comes with a platform, and then it also has a few additional plates and accessories and things like that. These are the clear plates that it comes with, and I will give you just a couple of quick tips. One is to always use the same plate for your top plate and the same plate for your bottom plate. And then you can flip this or turn it around, things like that, in order to reduce the amount of warping you get with your plates. And to take that even further, and also that will help keep the top of your card or top of your piece of cardstock from getting lots of little nicks and dents and stuff in it when you run it through the die cut machine, because your top plate is always your top plate, so it'll always stay smooth. The other thing that you can get is a magic mat, which I have and I use frequently. And you can see there's my used side. And it goes in and then you just use your top plate. Now, why would you want something like this? Well, you can see there is like no warping pretty much to my top plate. And that's because most of the time I use my magic mat with my top plate to die cut my pieces. Now, if it's a really thick piece of cardstock or it has a lot of fine detailing in the die, I do use the clear plate because it, I find, cuts through a little bit better with the clear plate than it does with the magic mat. So there's trade-offs, but I have both of those. There's also additional plates you can purchase for the machine that work for longer cards. So I have those as well. I don't use them as often as I thought I would, but some people use them all the time. So definitely something worth looking into if you make a lot of slimline cards or a lot of larger size cards. So I moved the machine up just so that you can see that this is a manual die cutting machine, meaning that there is a hand crank that you have to turn. There's no electricity that is attached to this. If you have arthritis or wrist problems, a lot of people like to use the electric Gemini Junior that I have seen a lot of people give really good reviews for. So another product worth looking into. I have found that this works perfect for my needs and it is a workhorse. I have been using it every day for over a year. You guys know I make a lot of cards. So I've had no issues other than the handles come off a couple of times. But that's a super easy fix. There's a screw inside of there that you need to use the Allen wrench that comes with to tighten it back down. Otherwise, no issues. Where's the third item? Well, you guys are looking at it. It's some type of surface to create your cards on. And there's lots of different mats out there, just tons. And I looked at many, many, many of them. I used to use a craft mat from Cricut and I used that for a really, really long time. I liked it a lot and it was inexpensive. I will link to it as well as everything else I'm talking about down below. If you're on a budget, it's a great choice. If you are looking to kind of step things up from that type of mat, then a glass board is where it's at. Now, I wasn't sure what all the hype was at first when I started seeing lots of different people using glass boards. I love this thing and I love this specific glass board. And I'm going to tell you a couple of reasons why. One, there are several on the market that are black. A lot of people love them. I personally wanted something white and it was really hard to find a white glass mat that was large. I wanted something large and I wanted it to be white because I prefer to work on white. The second reason why I love this particular glass board so much is that I have the magnet backed version and I have these really strong magnets that they sell as well. And I use these all the time, way more than I ever thought I was going to. They are perfect for holding your piece of cardstock in place while you are ink blending. They are great for putting your piece of cardstock and then having a stencil over the top. You can just pop a magnet on there. If you get any ink on it, you just wipe it off real quick with a cloth or a baby wipe or whatever it is that you use. These are game changers. I almost never pull out my silicone mat anymore that I used to use, which, by the way, if you are on a budget, having a simple silicone mat that you ink blend on is amazing because it helps keep the paper in place while you're ink blending. This glass board also has the grid pattern behind it, which for me is perfect because I use it all the time. Some people prefer to not have a grid behind them when they are underneath their work when they're working. There are also versions of this board that come with no grid. You can actually get pictures that you submit printed onto that background. And you'll have to check out the website. It's just a really cool glass board. I cannot say enough good things about it. The fourth basic you're going to need is some type of blending brush or blending tool. Now, I started out when I was first making cards with these tools. They have a little bit of Velcro on here, and then you get little foam pieces to pop on there, and you rub this in your ink, and then you rub it on your cardstock. They are fairly inexpensive, but you need to keep in mind you'll need one of these little guys for pretty much every color of ink that you have. So over time, it can actually get kind of pricey when you are buying lots of these. I was lucky enough to have not bought a ton of these by the time I realized there was such a thing as blending brushes. Now, some people love these tools, much prefer it. They feel like they have more control, and so they do all of their blending with these. It's definitely worth trying this out and trying out a couple of blending brushes to see what you like. Now that I have blending brushes, I almost never pull these out. So let's talk about blending brushes. There are lots of different blending brushes on the market, tons of them. Kind of the first one out there was the Life-Changing Blending Brush by Picket Fence Studios. These are awesome. I bought this little holder off of Amazon. It was inexpensive, easy to use, and then I just put some little stickers on here and I colored them so that way I would know which brush I use for which color. Is it necessary to have a brush for every color? No, I just do because, you know, I love having lots of different crafty things in my craft room. So I've got this little holder. I've got brush for each color. And then on the other side, I have a couple of small specialty brushes that I can use to get in little detailed areas and spots. Now, what other kind of brushes are there? I also have Gina K Designs blending brushes, and these are white. I will tell you the blending brushes that I reach for more often are the Picket Fence Studios Life-Changing Blender brushes. And the reason is because when I wipe them off when I'm done, I'm able to clean them much easier than I am the Gina K brushes. Now, I like the Gina K brushes because they're white, and they match my craft room, but it's going to be a personal preference type of thing. I think the biggest benefit to the blending brushes, especially I have found with these guys, is that I can get a flawless blend with these, and it's easy. It's, for me anyway, for the way I work, I find it incredibly easy to blend with blending brushes. So give them a try, and it takes a little bit of practice. Remember that as well. Anytime you get any kind of new tool in your craft room, don't just try it once, try it 5, 6, 7 times, and then decide whether or not it is a tool for you. My fifth basic is reverse tweezers. Now, these take some time to get used to. I'm not gonna lie, when I first started using these, I was like, what? I could not wrap my brain around it. Now, they are definitely one of my absolutely most used tools in my craft room. They are perfect for holding small die cuts when you're applying glue. You guys have seen me do that a million times when I'm making cards. They are great for placing things on your cards because they help you to keep the item steady and your big fingers don't get in the way. At least my big fingers are always getting in the way when I'm trying to put small details onto my cards. This is a fairly inexpensive item that you can add to your craft room, which is going to really up your game with your cards. The sixth basic is going to be some type of jewel picker. Now, I started out with, actually, I don't even have it anymore. I threw it away. I had a different one that had like a little screw part that you screwed and you got some sticky stuff that came out. It was terrible. It never worked for me. Maybe it was user error, but I could never get the thing to work right. So the second one that I purchased was this one that has little wax pieces on the ends, and there's a fine point and a wide point. I personally almost never use the fine point. It was always the wide point, and it works pretty well. I used this for a long time. I still like it. I moved on to this one, and I'm much happier with this one now than I was with that one. And this one, I think it's pretty because it has these little jewels in there. Kind of silly, I know. But it has this little pokey tool, which is great for popping pieces in when you're doing die cut inlay. It's great for popping pieces out of your metal dies. Lots and lots of uses. It's great for moving your sequins around on the card after you've gotten it on there and you're trying to decide where you want it and you don't want it to be sticking to something. And then on this side, it has a, I believe, wax tip. It might be silicone. I think it's wax though. And this picks up all of your sequins. It also picks up tiny little die cuts and helps you apply them on your card. This is another tool that gets used on every single card that I make. It's definitely something that you need in your craft room if you are going to be using any kind of sequins at any point in time. And even if you don't use sequins, like I said, this is great for using with small die cuts. And also this pokey side is great for other areas of your cards. I do also have another separate tool that is, I just call it my pokey tool. This I use a ton, and mostly because it has a very sharp point, unlike this, which is a flat point. I find that this sharp point like this is great for lifting up the edge of double-sided tape and different things. So I use this as well a lot. The seventh basic is some type of scoring board. Now you may be wondering, what is this, or why do I want it? Is it really necessary? And the answer is yes. It is. And I'm going to tell you why. For a long time, I just used a ruler and I used a scoring tool like this to score my paper. And does it work? Yes, works great. Is it easy to mess up? Yes. Is it convenient? No. Is this convenient and easy to get it right the first time? Absolutely. It's because it has all these little grooved areas. So as you run this top piece over the cardstock, it kind of finds that groove and it's really easy to do. And you probably don't see me use it as much in current videos as you used to see me use it. And that is because usually I prep a lot of my card bases in advance. So you don't see me need to break this out to fold my card base. But I use this all the time to make card bases. And there are lots of different versions of this on the market. I can't really speak to those other versions because I've never used them. This is the one I have. I really like it because it's a smaller sized board. And if you aren't sensing a theme here, I like small stuff because I can easily put it away, easily get it back out, and it's not going to take up a ton of space on my crafting surface. That's a big deal for me. The eighth basic you need in your craft space is definitely a workhorse white cardstock. I use Nina 80-pound cover stock in Solar White. This is very popular among card makers, and there's a reason. It pretty much does everything well, in my opinion. It's easy to ink blend on it. You can stamp on it. You can alcohol ink marker color on it. It's not my preferred cardstock to use for alcohol ink coloring, for Copic coloring, but you definitely can. Lots of crafters out there use it for that. It's also fairly inexpensive, but it has a really nice heft to it at 80 pounds. I used to purchase 80 and 110 pound, and I find that I use the 80 pound much more frequently. I use it so much that I purchase it by the ream, and it is far more cost effective that way. So I will link down to that ream that I purchase. The second type of cardstock that you might want to consider having in your stash is for alcohol ink coloring. There are lots of different ones. I have found that a fairly cost-effective one is the Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock. I use this generally speaking when I am coloring. There are lots of other ones on the market. One that's very popular as well with colorists is Express It paper. It's very pricey though. So for me, I don't find it to be cost effective. And so I go with the Spectrum Noir. The ninth basic you're going to need is scissors. And I'm going to tell you two different kinds of scissors that I have that get a lot of use by me. The first is this fine detail scissors. They're spring loaded. They're by Fiskars. Took a little while to get used to them, but these are great for fussy cutting. So when you're fussy cutting, you're cutting out around a stamped image, and these work really, really well for that. The other type of scissors are non-stick scissors. I have no idea how I lived before I had these. These, I think, are a basic for a craft room. Now, if you would have asked me before, are they basic? I would have said no, just use your regular scissors. Nope. These babies are definitely a basic in my book. And the reason is because I cannot count how many times I would get irritated that I had foam adhesive stuck on my other pair of scissors, or I had from double-sided tape, I would have the little gluey, sticky residue stuck on there from trimming pieces of tape and stuff like that. This, you don't have that at all. You can see these are coated, and so every time you cut, it's going to cut sharp and cleanly when you cut through any kind of double-sided adhesive tape or foam, but it's not going to stick everywhere. Makes life so much easier. The 10th basic is adhesive, and there's lots of different types of adhesive. You can have glue, you can have tape, double-sided tape, you can have foam squares that have adhesive on them. Do I think all of them are necessary? Well, that depends. It depends on what you do, what type of cards you make. I find all of them to absolutely be necessary, and I use all of them all the time. I have a large drawer in my craft room actually that is full of different kinds of adhesives, and I'm constantly reaching in there and grabbing different things for different kinds of projects that I'm doing. My most used by far is my liquid adhesive. This is Gina K Connect glue, and it comes in this large bottle. I've just removed the label off of there, and I've added a fine point metal tip. This is from Art Glitter Glue, and this metal tip, I've just replaced the plastic top that came with this, and it has a little pin that goes in there, and so that keeps it from drying out or from clogging up. I use double-sided adhesive tape, usually different sizes from scrapbook.com, or I will also use Score Tape, which is another brand of double-sided adhesive tape. Now for foam squares, there's lots of different ones on the market. The two that I use frequently are Scrapbook Adhesives and then iCraft. These are really great for popping up anything on your card. You also can get rolls of foam tape. I have those as well. My most used items are actually the small squares because I use those to pop up little pieces on my cards. The other type that I use all the time are foam strips from Heavy Doodle. I love these so much because they work really well for shaker cards. You'll see me use these a lot for shaker cards. I also have a gigantic roll that I have from Picket Fence Studios, which is great for popping up large pieces or for die cutting, and then you can put it behind a die cut. So there's lots and lots of different ones out there on the market. I would recommend starting out with some type of liquid adhesive and maybe some type of foam square or something like that to experiment with dimension on your cards. The next basic is low tack tape. There's lots of different low tack tapes out there. I have several different ones, but I tend to use them for different types of things. My most used by far is highlighter tape. I love this stuff for taping dies onto cardstock. It has never torn my paper. It is super easy to use, and these rolls will last for a long time. The other types of tape that I use, I have this pink tape that's from ThermoWeb. It's pixie tape. I find this to be very low tack. It doesn't tear my paper. I really like to use this tape when I am watercoloring. I find that it's great. I will use this as well to tape down my dies. I also have mint tape from scrapbook.com. This is another great low tack tape. I like this one because it's very low tack and it works great for lots of different things. You can see I'm almost out. I've used almost that whole roll. And then the last one I use frequently is Post-it tape. And you can use this to tape your dies to your paper when you're die cutting, but you the thing I use this for the most is I use this for masking. So if I'm doing some kind of silhouette stamping and I want to have a section of my card ink blended, I will put a strip of Post-it tape on each side, do all the ink blending, pull the Post-it tape off, and you've got a perfectly ink blended section of your card, and then the rest of it is left completely white. Does not tear your paper. You get a fair amount of it in your roll, and it's super easy to work with. The 12th basic you need in your craft room is definitely ink pads. You are going to accumulate a lot of these if you haven't already. They are very addicting. There's lots of different kinds, and they actually do different things. I know it's kind of weird to think, okay, well, they're all just ink. Not so much. They all work differently and are perfect for different kinds of applications. My most used ink pad is my black hybrid ink pad from Pigment Studios. I use this for alcohol marker coloring, watercoloring, all kinds of different applications. The second type of black ink that I reach for all the time is black pigment ink. And my favorite is VersaFine Clair and Nocturne. There's lots of different ones on the market. Now, you can use this for lots of different things. I personally find that this works best when I am trying to get a nice solid black image and I want it to be very true black. And also because it's pigment ink, it gives you, I feel like, really, really sharp lines. So if I'm just stamping out a sentiment, I want it to be very sharp and have a nice black color, I use my VersaFine Clair. The other stamp pad that probably gets the third most used out of all my stamp pads is my Versamark embossing ink pad. Now, I know a lot of people will say, well, there's no difference really between any of the embossing inks. I think there is in my personal experience. So you're going to find out that you're going to have opinions that differ from mine, that differ from lots of other crafters that you're going to see online and in the industry. And that is fine. Different things are going to work better for you. I think for me, the biggest thing is I like the fact that this ink pad is curved on the edges. I find that makes it a little bit easier for me to hold in my hand. I like the thickness of the foam pad, and I also find that the re-inker works really well with this. So this is my go-to embossing ink. For me, the two types of colored ink that I use most often are dye inks and hybrid inks. And I'm just quickly going to explain a little bit about the differences. Dye inks tend to work a little bit better for stamping, and they work better for watercoloring and different kinds of techniques like that. Hybrid inks, the most well-known is probably Distress Oxide. I have all the Distress Oxide colors because it is awesome for ink blending, especially if you are new to ink blending. These I find are much more forgiving, far easier to ink blend with, and they have this really beautiful, creamy kind of look to them once everything is ink blended. Can you ink blend with dye ink? Absolutely, and I do all the time. But if you're a beginner, these guys are a little bit more forgiving. I personally think you need to have both in your craft room. You need to have dye inks, you need to have hybrid inks, and there are tons of different ones on the market. I don't want to get too much farther into this because I could do a whole video on it. If you guys are interested in me doing a video specifically about inks, let me know and post that down in the comments. Number 13 basic is a heat gun. Now, I call this a heat tool and I call this a heat gun. I have both in my craft room. You can heat emboss with both of them. I generally do not heat emboss with this. I heat emboss with this. I'll briefly explain why I have both. This is a heated craft tool. You can see it has a more diffused area that the heat comes out from. It has one level of heat. It will melt embossing powder. It just takes a little while longer to do. But the reason I love this tool is I use it a lot to dry my inked panels if I'm wanting to move on to the next step. Or if I'm wanting to dry a watercolored panel, this is great. I use this all of the time. This guy I use for my heat embossing. It does have two settings, so you can do a low or a high. So if you are in the market for a tool and you can only afford one, go with a dual setting heat gun. You can use a low setting to help you dry things. This is a really nice heat gun. This is Wagner. It's heavy duty. I've had zero problems with it. It has lasted a long time. Definitely a must-have if you're going to do any kind of heat embossing. You need a heat tool in order to melt that embossing powder. Your 14th basic that you're going to want in your craft room, especially if you're doing heat embossing, is a anti-static powder tool. Now you can get a little bag that has anti-static powder in it and use that, or you can get some type of brush applicator. I have the Rabbit Hole Designs applicator, and I actually did a whole video just on testing this tool out, and I am happy to report that I have continued to use it, and I've used it a lot and I love it. I will never go back to the bag one myself personally. It is great for all kinds of different things. So if you're interested in learning more about this tool specifically, I will link to that video down below in the description, so that way you can check it out. The 15th and final basic you're going to want to look at having in your craft room is embossing powder. There are tons of different embossing powders. You can see I oftentimes will transfer my embossing powders to these little plastic containers and then put what they are on the top. I just like the size of these containers, but they originally came in a different container. I'm going to talk briefly about these and what I think is important to have as a new paper crafter. You definitely want to have some type of clear embossing powder. There are lots of different companies that make clear embossing powder. I tend to reach for my Ranger Superfine Clear when I'm using clear embossing powder. You also want to have some type of black embossing powder. My go-to black embossing powder is Wow Primary Ebony Superfine Black. I use this all the time. It's my favorite. I've tried several different embossing powders, and this one for me, I have found to work the best. The other one is you're going to need white. For me, thus far, my favorite white embossing powder is Simon Says Stamp Fine Detail White. And then you're going to want some metallics. So silver, gold. I also have a bronze, and I tend to use the Ranger silver, gold, and bronze, but then I have an antique gold from Simon Says Stamp, which I really love. I also have a container of ultra thick clear embossing powder, which is great for some specialty techniques. So not necessarily a basic, but I did take that out just so I could show you there's lots and lots of different kinds of embossing powders. They come in a million colors. Do you need all those colors? Probably not, but you might want all of those colors. I don't have very much colored embossing powder because I generally don't do a lot of colored embossing. I almost do only black, white, metallics, and clear. That seems to be kind of what I like to use on my cards. And I think that these are definitely a good basic to start out with. I absolutely recommend having black and white because they are great for heat embossing for sentiments. The golds, silvers, things like that aren't really a necessity, but they are really, really nice to use for your cards. They just look beautiful when you have that amazing metallic shine on your card. So definitely check those out as well. So that is going to wrap up my list of 15 basics for the new paper crafter. I hope you guys found this helpful. I know it's not my standard kind of video that I do, but I thought it would be really helpful to have all this information out there, especially for people who are just starting out with paper crafting. I know that when I was starting out, I would have found something like this to be super helpful, because I don't really see a lot of videos that talk about like what are the basics I need in order to get started paper crafting and also not have a lot of headaches. These products I'm telling you about, these are products that are a need, but also some of them are products that just make your life so much easier that they make the crafting process more enjoyable. All right, guys, please be sure to like and subscribe, as well as hit that notification bell, and I'll keep bringing you more crafty content in the future. Until next time, happy crafting.